There is a particular silence that greets you when you open your own front door and something is wrong. Not the absence of sound exactly, but the presence of tension hanging in the air like a held breath. I remember stepping into that silence on a Thursday evening in late October with my carry-on still rolling behind me and the stale recycled air of the airplane still clinging to my clothes. The house smelled different. That was my first clue. Not bad different, just altered somehow, like someone had rearranged the molecules while I was away and forgot to put them back before I returned. I stood in the foyer for 3 full seconds before I heard the small footsteps padding down the hallway toward me, and in those 3 seconds a question formed in my mind that I could not yet articulate. Why does my own home feel like a stranger's house? Before I continue, let me know in the comments where you are watching from, and if you enjoy stories like this, please like and subscribe because it helps me keep sharing more. My name is Lennox, but everyone calls me Ashley. I have gone by my middle name since college, and somewhere along the way I forgot I ever had another one. I was 36 years old that October, and I had been married to Marcus for 9 years. Our daughter Mila had just turned 7 2 weeks before my work trip, and I had missed her birthday party because of a client emergency in Seattle. That guilt sat heavy in my chest as I watched her appear at the end of the hallway, her small frame silhouetted against the kitchen light behind her. She did not run to me. That was unusual. Mila always ran. She would sprint across whatever distance separated us and launch herself into my arms with the absolute certainty that I would catch her every single time. But that evening she walked slowly, almost cautiously, like she was approaching something she was not sure she could trust. Before I continue, you need to subscribe to this channel because what I am about to reveal will shock you and you do not want to miss what happens next, so hit that subscribe button now. I knelt down and opened my arms expecting her to close the remaining distance, but she stopped about 2 feet away and looked at me with eyes that seemed older than 7. Eyes that held questions. Eyes that held something that looked uncomfortably like fear. I felt my smile falter. "Hey baby girl," I said, keeping my voice light and warm. "Did you miss me?" She nodded but did not move closer. "I missed you too," I said. "So much. I am sorry I could not be here for your birthday party." "Did Daddy make it special?" She nodded again, but her bottom lip trembled slightly and I watched her small hands twist together in front of her stomach. The motion reminded me of myself when I was nervous. When I was about to say something I knew would cause trouble. "What is wrong, sweetheart?" I asked, lowering my voice to that soft register I reserved for scraped knees and bad dreams. "You can tell me anything." She glanced over her shoulder toward the kitchen, then back at me, and in that glance I saw something that made my stomach drop. She was checking to see if someone was listening. She was checking to see if it was safe. Mila took one small step closer and her fingers found the sleeve of my blazer, pinching the fabric between her thumb and forefinger like she was testing whether I was real. Then she looked up at me with those 2 old eyes and whispered the words that would unravel everything I thought I knew about my life. "Mommy, can I stop taking the pills Daddy gives me?" My blood ran cold. Not metaphorically. Not poetically. I mean, the temperature in my veins seemed to drop 10 degrees in an instant and the hallway around me narrowed to a pinpoint focused entirely on my daughter's upturned face. "What pills?" I asked, and my voice came out wrong. Too sharp. Too scared. Mila flinched and I immediately softened my expression, forcing my features into something that would not frighten her. "Tell me about the pills, honey," I said more gently. "I did not know Daddy was giving you pills." She studied my face for a long moment and I could see her calculating whether to trust me with this information. That calculation broke my heart. 7 years old and already learning to weigh the cost of honesty. "He says they help me sleep," she finally said. "He gives them to me after dinner when you are not home." "But Mommy, they make me feel weird. Like my head is full of cotton and my legs do not work right. And sometimes I cannot remember things from the night before." I stared at her, unable to formulate a response. Marcus had never mentioned giving Mila any medication. We had never discussed it. There was nothing wrong with her sleep as far as I knew, and we had both agreed years ago that we would never give our daughter any medication without consulting each other and her pediatrician first. Do you think you could show me the pills? I asked carefully. Do you know where Daddy keeps them? She nodded and turned to head toward the kitchen, but I caught her arm gently. Wait, I said. Is Daddy home right now? He went to the store, she said. He said he would be back in an hour. That was a little while ago. I exhaled slowly. Good, I said. Good. Okay. Show me. She led me through the kitchen and toward the master bedroom, which struck me as odd because we kept all of Mila's children's vitamins and the rare dose of Tylenol in the upstairs bathroom. Why would Marcus keep pills for our daughter in our bedroom? Unless he did not want her to know where they came from. Unless he did not want anyone to find them easily. Mila stopped in front of the walk-in closet and pointed to the top shelf. Up there, she said. In the black bag behind the sweaters. I felt something twist in my chest. Not just concern now, but suspicion. A dark creeping suspicion that felt like betrayal even before I had evidence of anything wrong. I pulled the small step stool from the corner of the closet and reached up behind the folded sweaters on the top shelf. My fingers found the black leather DOP kit that Marcus used when he traveled. I pulled it down and held it in my hands for a moment, just looking at it. This was my husband's bag. The man I had slept beside for nearly a decade. The father of my child. And I was about to search it like he was a suspect. What would you do in this moment? Would you trust your spouse enough to wait and ask? Or would the fear for your child override everything else? I unzipped the bag. Inside there were the usual items. Razor. Deodorant. A spare phone charger. And pushed to the bottom, almost hidden beneath a travel-sized bottle of cologne, was a small amber prescription bottle. I pulled it out and read the label. My hands had begun to shake. The prescription was not in Mila's name. It was not in Marcus's name either. It was written to someone named Elara Vance. I had never heard that name in my life. The medication listed was something I did not recognize. A long clinical name that meant nothing to me but sent a chill down my spine nonetheless. The prescribing doctor was from a clinic in another state. A state Marcus had supposedly visited for work conferences 3 times in the past year. I looked at Mila, who was watching me with a mixture of hope and fear. How long has Daddy been giving you these? I asked quietly. Since you started traveling more for work, she said. Maybe 3 months. He said they would help me sleep better and not miss you so much at night. I closed my eyes and forced myself to breathe. 3 months. For 3 months my husband had been secretly medicating our daughter with pills prescribed to someone else. Pills from an unknown doctor. Pills he hid in the back of his closet like contraband. I thought about confronting him the moment he walked through the door. I thought about screaming and crying and demanding answers. But something told me that would be a mistake. Something told me I needed to know exactly what these pills were before I showed my hand. Because if Marcus had a reasonable explanation, he would have told me about this months ago. And if he did not have a reasonable explanation, then I needed to be prepared for what that meant. Mila, I said, kneeling down to her level again. I need you to do something very important for me. Can you be brave? She nodded solemnly. I need you to pretend like you never told me about this, I said. Just for a little while. Just until Mommy figures out what is going on. Can you do that? She hesitated. Will I have to take more pills? Not tonight, I promised. I will think of something to tell Daddy. But you have to act normal, okay? Like nothing happened. Because if Marcus knew she had talked to me, and if what I was starting to suspect was true, then I did not know what he might do. That thought alone made me nauseous. Fearing my own husband. The next morning I called in sick to work. I waited until Marcus left for his office, then I drove to a private laboratory across town. The kind that does medical testing for lawyers during custody disputes and insurance investigations. I told them I needed an urgent analysis of an unknown medication and I was willing to pay whatever it cost. They said results would take 48 hours. I did not sleep for those 48 hours. I lay beside Marcus in our bed each night and listened to him breathe and wondered who I had married. I watched him interact with Mila and looked for signs of malice or deception, but he seemed like the same devoted father he had always been. Warm. Attentive. Quick with bedtime stories and forehead kisses. It made everything worse somehow. If you are watching this and you have ever looked at someone you love and wondered if you truly know them, please drop a comment below and tell me I am not alone in this, because right now I feel like I am losing my mind. The call from the laboratory came on a Saturday morning. Marcus was in the shower and Mila was watching cartoons in the living room, and I stepped out onto the back patio with the phone pressed to my ear. "Mrs. Brennan," the technician said. "I have your results." "What is it?" I asked. What was he giving her? There was a pause on the other end. A pause that lasted too long. "The compound in those pills," he said slowly, "is not a standard pharmaceutical. It is a combination of sedatives. Strong ones. The kind typically used for anesthesia in medical procedures. In the dosages indicated on that bottle, administered regularly to a child your daughter's size over a period of months, you would expect to see significant cognitive impairment. Memory issues. Motor function problems. And potentially," I felt the phone slipping in my sweaty palm. "Potentially what?" I whispered. "Potentially long-term neurological damage," he said. "Mrs. Brennan who gave your daughter these pills?" I could not answer. My throat had closed up completely. "I need to advise you to contact the authorities immediately," he continued. "And your daughter needs to be examined by a specialist as soon as possible. This is extremely serious." I ended the call and stood on the patio staring at the garden we had planted together. Marcus and me. Last spring. Tomatoes and basil and little flowers that Mila had picked out herself. A family garden. A family life. A family built on lies so deep I could not see the bottom. The sliding door opened behind me and I turned to see Marcus standing there with wet hair and a coffee cup in his hand. He smiled at me, and in that moment I saw nothing but the man I had loved for a decade. "Hey," he said. "Beautiful morning, right?" I looked at him and I made a decision. I smiled back. "It really is," I said. "I just needed some air." He nodded and went back inside, and I stood there with the phone still warm in my hand and the laboratory report burning through my skull. My husband had been slowly poisoning our daughter. My husband, the man who read her bedtime stories and braided her hair for school. My husband who I had trusted with her life. But here is what kept me frozen in place. Here's what made me realize this nightmare was far from over. If Marcus was willing to do this to his own child, then what was he willing to do to me when he found out I knew? And more importantly, why? What possible reason could he have for wanting our daughter sedated and confused and unable to remember her evenings clearly? The sliding door opened again and Marcus poked his head out. "Oh hey," he said casually. "I meant to ask. Did you grab that black bag from my closet? I could not find it this morning." My heart stopped beating. Every muscle in my body turned to stone. I watched his eyes searching my face for something, and I wondered if he could hear how loud the silence had become between us. "What black bag?" I asked, and my voice did not waver. Strange. I felt like I was watching myself from very far away. "My dopp kit," he said. "The leather one. I could have sworn I left it on the top shelf." I shrugged with a calmness I did not feel. "Have not seen it," I said. "Maybe check the bathroom." He held my gaze for 1 second too long. "Maybe," he said. Then he disappeared back inside and I released the breath I had been holding. He was looking for the pills. Which meant he knew they should be there. Which meant tonight he was planning to give Mila another dose. Unless I stopped him. Unless I got her out of this house before the sun went down. But as I stood there calculating my next move, I realized something that made my blood freeze all over again. Marcus had not asked me why I was outside. He had not asked why I looked pale or shaken. He had skipped straight to asking about the bag. Which meant he already suspected something was wrong. Which meant whatever came next was going to be a war, and my daughter's life was the territory we were fighting over. I turned and looked through the glass door at Mila sitting cross-legged in front of the television, her small body so fragile and trusting and unaware of the danger she had been living in for months. Then I looked at Marcus standing in the kitchen pouring himself more coffee, checking his phone with studied nonchalance. And I made myself a promise. Whatever it took. Whatever I had to become. Whatever lies I had to tell and truths I had to uncover. I would protect my daughter from the monster I had married. Even if it destroyed everything I had ever built. Even if it destroyed me. What I did not know then was that the pills were just the beginning. The real horror was still waiting. Buried in secrets so dark that when I finally uncovered them I would wish I had never come home from that work trip at all. I am reading and replying to every single comment under this story, and if this chapter made your heart race like mine did when I lived it, then subscribe now, because what I discovered next about those pills and the woman named Elara Vance will change everything you think you know about this nightmare, and I refuse to let anyone miss what happens in the next chapter. The name Elara Vance haunted me through the rest of that Saturday like a ghost I could not shake. I repeated it to myself while I folded laundry and washed dishes and pretended to be a normal wife in a normal house with a normal husband who was not slowly poisoning our child. Elara Vance. Who was she? Why was her name on a prescription bottle hidden in my husband's closet? And what was her connection to the man I had shared a bed with for 9 years? I knew I had to find answers before Marcus realized how much I already knew. The clock was ticking, and every second I spent in that house felt like walking through a minefield blindfolded. That evening I told Marcus I was taking Mila to visit my mother for a few days. A spontaneous trip, I said. She misses her grandmother and I have some vacation days to use before the end of the year. He looked at me with something flickering behind his eyes. Suspicion maybe. Or calculation. But he smiled and kissed my forehead and told me to drive safe, and in that moment I hated him more than I had ever hated anyone in my entire life. Before I continue, you need to subscribe to this channel because what I am about to reveal will change everything and you do not want to miss the moment I finally confronted the man who was destroying my daughter, so hit that subscribe button right now. My mother lived 3 hours away in a small town where everyone knew everyone and secrets did not stay buried for long. I drove through the night with Mila sleeping in the back seat and my knuckles white against the steering wheel. Every few miles I checked the rearview mirror, half expecting to see Marcus's headlights following us. But the road behind me stayed dark and empty, and somehow that emptiness felt more threatening than any pursuit. We arrived at my mother's house just after midnight. She took one look at my face and asked no questions. Just opened her arms and held me while I cried for the first time since this nightmare began. I told her everything. The pills. The laboratory results. The name I did not recognize on a prescription that should never have existed. My mother listened in silence, and when I finished she said something that cut straight to the heart of my deepest fear. Lennox, she said, using my real name the way she always did when things were serious. What if those pills were not meant to help Mila sleep? What if they were meant to make her forget? I stared at her. Forget what? I whispered. She held my gaze. That is what you need to find out. The next morning I left Mila with my mother and drove to the public library in town. I needed a computer that Marcus could not trace. I needed to search for Elara Vance without leaving digital footprints on any device connected to our family accounts. What I found in that library shattered everything I thought I knew about my marriage. Elara Vance was not a stranger. She was not some random name Marcus had stolen for a fake prescription. She was a woman who had died 3 years ago in a car accident. A single mother with a young daughter. A woman who had worked at the same company as Marcus before I ever met him. And according to her obituary, she had been survived by her only child. A 6-year-old girl named Mila. I read that name 3 times before the words made sense. Mila. My daughter's name. The daughter Elara Vance left behind was named Mila. I felt the room spinning around me. My hands trembled so badly I could barely scroll through the search results. But I forced myself to keep reading. To keep digging. Because the truth was right there waiting for me to find it. And when I finally pieced it together, I understood why Marcus had been so desperate to keep our daughter sedated and confused. If what I am about to tell you does not make you want to scream, then I do not know what will, and I need you to drop a comment right now telling me how you would feel if you discovered this about your own spouse, because I have never felt so alone in my life. Elara Vance and Marcus had been engaged before he met me. They had a daughter together. A daughter named Mila, who was taken into foster care after her mother's death because Marcus had never been listed as the father on the birth certificate. He had abandoned them both. Walked away from his own child and started fresh with a new life and a new wife who knew nothing about his past. But 3 years ago something changed. According to court records I found buried in the public database, Marcus had filed for custody of his biological daughter. The case had been rejected because he could not prove paternity and because he had no prior relationship with the child. The foster system had deemed him unfit. And somewhere in the mess of those legal documents I found the name of the family who had eventually adopted Elara's daughter. The Brennans. My maiden name. My parents. The daughter Elara Vance left behind had been adopted by my own mother and father. She had been given a new name and a new life, and that little girl was the same Mila who now called me mommy. The Mila sleeping safely at my mother's house right now was not my biological daughter. She was Marcus's daughter from his first abandoned family. And he had married me to get her back. Do you understand what I am telling you? My entire marriage was a lie. Every moment of tenderness. Every whispered promise. Every time he looked at me like I was his whole world. It was all a long con designed to reunite him with the child he had thrown away. I was nothing but a vehicle. A means to an end. A convenient path to custody that the courts had denied him. I thought about the timeline. How Marcus had pursued me so aggressively when we first met. How he had seemed almost too perfect. Too eager. Too ready to commit. I thought about how quickly he had bonded with Mila after we started dating. How he insisted on adopting her legally once we were married, even though my parents had already given her our family name. He wanted his paternal rights restored. He wanted to erase any evidence that he had ever walked away from his own flesh and blood. And the pills? The sedatives he had been feeding her for months. I finally understood their purpose. Mila had been having nightmares. She had started asking questions about her birth mother. About why she looked different from me. About memories that did not match the story we had told her about her early childhood. Marcus was drugging her to make her forget. To erase the memories that threatened to expose his carefully constructed lie. He was chemically altering our daughter's brain to protect his own secrets. I need you to subscribe right now because the confrontation that happened next is something I will never forget as long as I live, and if you have ever wanted to see a woman burn down the life of the man who betrayed her, then you cannot miss what comes next. I drove back to my mother's house in a daze. I sat with Mila and watched her play with my mother's old cat, and I studied her face with new eyes. She had his nose. Marcus's nose. The same slight upturn at the tip. The same spray of freckles across the bridge. How had I never seen it before? But I also saw Elara in her now. The woman from the obituary photo. The same wide-set eyes. The same delicate chin. This child had 2 parents who had failed her completely. One who died and left her alone. One who abandoned her, then spent years scheming to get her back through deception and medical abuse. And me? I was the fool who had loved her as my own without ever knowing the truth. That night I made phone calls. To a lawyer. To a detective. To the same laboratory that had analyzed the pills. I built a case against my husband brick by brick, and I did it with the cold precision of someone who has nothing left to lose. The detective confirmed what I had already suspected. Marcus had been planning this for years. He had researched my family specifically because they had adopted Mila. He had engineered our meeting at that coffee shop. He had manufactured every romantic moment we ever shared. There were emails on a secret account. Messages to a friend overseas where he bragged about his long game. Where he laughed about how easy it had been to make me fall in love with him. I read those messages and I felt something die inside me. Not my love for him because that had already turned to ash. But my faith in my own judgment. My belief that I could recognize truth from lies. My confidence that the world made any kind of sense at all. What would you do if you discovered that every precious memory was a performance? That the man who held you at night had been laughing at you the whole time? 3 days later I returned home. Not to reconcile. Not to confront. But to end things on my own terms. Marcus was waiting for me in the kitchen. He looked different now that I knew the truth. The warmth in his eyes seemed manufactured. The concern on his face seemed rehearsed. Everything about him was a costume and I could finally see the hollow man underneath. "Where is Mila?" he asked. "She is safe," I said. "She is somewhere you will never touch her again." His expression flickered. "What are you talking about?" I placed the laboratory report on the kitchen counter. Then the prescription bottle. Then the printed emails from his secret account. Then the court documents showing his rejected custody petition from 3 years ago. I watched his face as he looked at each piece of evidence. I watched the mask crumble. I watched the real Marcus emerge from behind the performance. And he was terrifying. "You had no right," he said quietly. His voice had changed. Lower. Harder. The voice of a stranger. "She is my daughter." "She is a child you abandoned," I said. "A child you tried to erase with chemicals because she was starting to remember her real mother. You are not her father, Marcus. You are her abuser." He moved toward me and I held up my phone. "I already called the police," I said. "They are on their way. If you touch me there will be witnesses." He stopped. His hands clenched at his sides. I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. The desperate search for an escape route. But there was none. I had made sure of that. The evidence was already with my lawyer. The detective had copies of everything. My mother had instructions to contact the media if anything happened to me. I had built a fortress of truth around myself and my daughter and there was nothing he could do to tear it down. "You ruined everything," he said. And there it was. The real accusation. Not that he had done monstrous things. Not that he had betrayed and manipulated and drugged a child. But that I had ruined his plan by discovering it. "You never loved me," I said. It was not a question. He laughed. A cold empty sound. "I loved what you could give me," he said. "Does that count?" I picked up my keys. The police arrived 6 minutes later. "I am reading every single comment under this story and I need to know if you saw this coming or if it blindsided you the way it blindsided me because even now telling this story I still cannot believe I lived through it." The months that followed were brutal. Court hearings. Custody battles. A criminal trial that dragged on far too long. Marcus tried every legal trick available to him. He painted me as unstable. He claimed the pills were vitamins. He hired experts who contradicted my experts. But the truth has a weight that lies cannot match. In the end the jury saw through him. Mila testified via video link. Her small voice describing the cotton-headed feeling. The lost memories. The fear she felt every time her father handed her those pills. I watched Marcus's face as his own daughter condemned him. I watched him realize that his long game had failed completely. He received 12 years. Not enough in my opinion. But enough to keep him away from us while Mila grows up. Enough to let her heal without his shadow over her life. Today she is 10 years old. She knows the truth about her birth mother now. We visit Elara's grave together every year on her birthday. Mila leaves flowers and talks to her and I stand back and let them have their private moments. She still calls me Mom. I asked her once if she wanted to stop. If knowing the biological truth changed how she felt about me. She looked at me with those wise eyes that had seen too much too young, and she said something I will never forget. Being a mom is not about blood, she said. It is about showing up. You showed up for me when no one else would. I cried for an hour after that. The moral of this story is simple, but it took me years of pain to learn it. Trust is sacred. When someone violates that trust, especially with a child, they forfeit every claim to loyalty and love and mercy. You do not owe forgiveness to people who would destroy the innocent to serve their own needs. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is burn down the life you built with a liar and start again from the ashes. To every parent watching this, please hear me. Know who you are married to. Really know them. Not the performance they show you, but the person underneath. Because the monsters who hurt children do not always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like the love of your life. Sometimes they sleep beside you for years before you see their true face. Watch your children. Listen to them. Believe them when they tell you something is wrong. A child's instinct is pure and uncorrupted. Mila tried to warn me with those simple words. Can I stop taking the pills Daddy gives me? She saved both of us with that question. All I had to do was listen. If this story moved you in any way, I need you to do something for me right now. Subscribe to this channel because there are more stories like this that need to be told, and I refuse to let them stay buried in silence. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another chapter of truth. Drop a comment telling me what you would have done in my situation, because I am reading every single response and your words mean more to me than you will ever know. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who might be living in a lie right now without knowing it. You could save a life with a simple share. And if you made it this far, thank you. Thank you for witnessing my story. Thank you for caring about my daughter. Thank you for being part of this community that refuses to look away from the hard truths. I will see you in the next story. Stay safe. Trust your instincts. And never stop protecting the ones who cannot protect themselves.